Dear beloved Thầy, dear beloved community, let us sit up beautifully and come back to our breathing, aware that the breath is flowing in and flowing out. Befriend and smile to our in-breath and our out-breath. Dear beloved Thầy, dear beloved community, today is January the 10th, 2021. Can you hear me better now? Yeah. Dear beloved community, I feel that we are very blessed, very fortunate, because we are in a safe environment. Especially our monastic brothers and sisters here, and some of our lay brothers and sisters who are here with us in the winter retreat. 2 months have passed for our winter retreat, and almost 11 months now since we had the pandemic, and we are so blessed to be here practicing, having a safe home. While in the world, in the United States, we have had so many painful, violent incidents. Sometimes we are in a safe environment. We become too complacent. We are not aware, and we take for granted the safety that we have, the practice that is available to us, and the community, the brotherhood and the sisterhood that's always there for us. Whatever that is most familiar to us is easy to take for granted until it's gone. Today, the topic of the talk is about racial and religious discrimination. It's a highly emotionally charged subject. So I've been sitting with it, feeling a bit unnerved, nervous by it, and especially given the recent incident at the Capitol Hill. It makes me want even more than ever to understand why we are where we are as a society, why we are who we are, and what we are doing. So let us explore these aspects together. I certainly don't have the answers. I certainly struggle. And because I feel that it's such a charged subject, it triggers not just intellectual but emotional, visceral reactions in many of us. I want us to have a body-based approach instead of a intellectual or theoretical approach, but to look at the manifestation of our mind through our body, which is very much in alignment with our practice, awareness of the body in the body. So let us check in, take a moment to just check in our body. We are very aware that we have the brain, the head brain. And I'm sure this past week, these past months, our minds have been quite active with fear, with anticipation, with hope, with despair, all sorts of thoughts and feelings. So we have this brain, this mind that has been very active. But we also learn that other organs in our body, actually they send more signals to the brain than the brain to them. For example, for the GI system, the intestines, the stomach and the intestines, they send 80% of the nerves go from the GI system to the brain, and only 20% of the nerves go from the brain to the guts. And so lately, scientists have been referring to the gut as the gut brain. So now we have the head brain, but we also have the gut brain. And this is very apt because we know that not only the brain is active when we are in stress, when we are experiencing strong emotions, but actually our guts manifest all of those symptoms more obviously. We have words like, I have butterfly in my stomach, I feel tight in my stomach, there's pain, there's indigestion, I feel like there's a fist in there. So we know that we experience viscerally in our gut system. So that's it in itself is a brain. It sends signals, it's very aware of what's going on. It is a manifestation of our mind and of our body. So we can look into our guts and see how we react. Some of us, when we have stress, when we have pain and sorrow, we experience it in our guts. That's the first place that we have. We may have diarrhea, we may have constipation, indigestion. All those symptoms become very dominant in our body. So that's the gut brain. We also know with the heart, there are also sensory neurons sent to the brain. More than 80% of the sensory of the neurons come from the heart and go to the brain. And then the brain sending signals to the heart and regulate the heart, but only 20% of the neurons. So actually the signals going to the brain is a lot more dominant than vice versa, because we often think the brain is the boss. The brain regulates, the brain controls, but actually we know that our organs, like the guts and the heart, and the lungs as well, send signals, more signals so. And so we see that in our body, there's not that concept of the boss, the master, so much, but that every single organ manifests our way of being, our state of being. So if we, through this turbulence of our society, of our time, and if we learn to come back to our body and listen to our body and hear all these symptoms and signs that manifest in us, we will be able to be more in touch with what's going on in us, in the society, reflected in our own body. And that's more real, more humble, more concrete than if we were to dwell in the head and of our intellectual discussion and logic and reason, because given what has happened, really, it's not logical. Many of the things that we experience in ourselves, in our society, we feel that it's not logical and it's irrational in that way. So let us take a moment to breathe with the bell, to scan through our head brain, heart brain, lung brain, gut brain, skin brain. Just scan through gently our body and listen to the message from the body. And breathe and calm all the anxiety, the nervous sensation in our body. when we talk about discrimination, whether it's religious or racial or gender discrimination, whichever kind of discrimination it's rooted in our mind. And we learn about explicit and implicit bias. I think it's good we go over that a little bit. Bias is an attitude or a view that is in favor of or against a group, a person, or a group of people. That's a bias. Thiên vị hay là kỳ thị, a bias. And a bias can be explicit or implicit. An implicit bias is an attitude, a view that we are conscious of. I hate red color, I like brown color. That's something we can say. I like that person, I hate that group of people, I'm afraid of them. That's explicit. We had a woman who lived with us for a while, and when she disliked somebody, if that person walked into a room, she'll start to cough. She'll start to make sounds that are quite unpleasant. Or she'll stand up and she would walk out of the room or move to another place. If she did not like that person, she would dislike also her friends and her relatives. That's very explicit. And so we can see in us, we have preferences and prejudices and discriminations. When we don't like somebody or a group of people, when we see them, we don't want to look at them. We don't want to even hear the sound. We want to walk out of the room. We shut down. We block the person out, or that group of people out, or that subject out, or that situation, that memory, we block it out because we don't want to face it. That's explicit. An implicit bias is something that we're actually not conscious of, not aware of, but it still dictates our speech, our thinking, and our behaviors. And an implicit bias, not only that is unconscious, but it can go contrary to our overt beliefs and assumptions. For example, I'm a doctor. I make the vow to treat everybody and do no harm to anybody. And yet, somebody comes in because of that person's color. So there's an example, actually, a woman brought her husband to the hospital because he was severely ill and he was African American. And this was most likely in the 80s and the 90s. And they ran all these tests, like including HIV test, because he was so extremely sick. And it came back negative every time. But in the end, they still diagnosed him with HIV. And the woman confronted the doctors and said, why? It's negative. And why do you conclude that? And the doctor said, but he's African American. And the woman said, stop right there. You check for the sickness, for the illnesses that white people also suffer. You check for them. And so the doctor stopped. And they checked, and it turned out he had lymphoma, non-Hodgkin lymphoma. So that's an implicit bias. One can be a doctor, one can be a police, one can be very progressive, very just and good, and yet there we have certain biases deep within us that will manifest through our speech and actions that are contrary to our just and good views. So in terms of the police, we also know that they are more likely to stop and search, frisk, and to detain people of color than if they were Caucasian. So right now in prison, we know that the majority of the men are men of color, predominantly African Americans. So they may be in there, they may not have been convicted with any crimes yet, but because of that discrimination, they are first to be arrested, to be on trial, and to be waiting for the trial. So they are there in prison in great number. So these are the implicit bias that all of us have to face. And they say that particularly those of us who believe that we are progressive, that we are just, that we are for human rights and religious rights and environmental rights, etc. Those of us, actually, we have implicit bias that are very difficult to change because we are in denial. We can't accept the fact that we have biases. And by the way, you know what denial stands for? I love this one. I learned this from a social worker. Denial stands for don't even know I am lying. Very deep within, don't even know I'm lying. Okay? So I thought maybe we go through the little bit of the brain anatomy to understand ourselves from this body-based approach. So this is the brain that I'm standing like this. The nose is over here. Okay? And we have, right here is the brain stem. We also call the reptilian brain. And deep, because the brain has two halves. The left side, the left hemisphere, and the right hemisphere. And so if we split right in the middle, deep in there, we have this structure that we call, well, there are different structures in there that we call the limbic brain. Or the mammalian brain. And then we have this more recently developed brain we call the cortical brain. Cortical brain, or the neocortex, because it's new, more recent. Towards the front of this is the front brain. Just to introduce, we call the prefrontal cortex, PFC. There's a theory by Dr. McLean. It's called Triune Brain. Triune Brain. Tri means three. Un in French means one. So 3 and 1. And we say it's true. We have the reptilian brain, means the brain of the reptiles. Cái não bộ của những cái loài bò sát. And this brain takes care of very basic function, such as heart rate, respiratory rate, how many times we breathe a minute, etc. Heart rate, body temperature, fight and flight response, stress response. Which includes fight, flight, and freeze. Reptilian brain. These are its basic functions in us. Towards the base of the brain, down here. Yeah. We have deep inside the brain, the limbic brain, and it's also known as the emotional brain. All of the sensory inputs from our eyes, our ears, our mouth, not from the nose, from the body, the skin, will go to this limbic brain, and it will be processed. It will be compared to previous experiences. And if like a sight comes in, and we see that's the person that we dislike, the color or the shape of the person we dislike, or that we had a negative experience in the past, immediately it triggers a stress response. Our whole body tenses up. Our heart rate increases, respiratory rate increases, and we are ready to fight, đánh lại, or to flight, to run away, chạy, or to freeze. And actually the reptiles, they usually freeze first, if you notice. This is the oldest response. They just freeze in place. But the more advanced we are, these are the two, the fight or the flight. We usually fight if we can. But if we cannot, we'll run away. And if you feel trapped, then you freeze. So this is at work, the limbic brain. Through evolution, actually, the brain gives birth to itself, to this cortical brain. It's like a bark of a tree, our brain. There's that layer that enables us with many more functions like language, speech, memory, many things more, to execute, to plan and execute certain actions. It also gives us in this area right here, inhibition, to think about things and to decide whether it's a good action or not. Like on Wednesday, when they had the attack of the Capitol Hill, apparently they didn't think very much whether the actions they should carry out or not. So there was no inhibition there. There is compassion. There is self-awareness. So these are more recently developed in human, many more capacities, but some, I just want to mention that. So in this way, we see that in us, as we prize ourselves highly developed human beings, we know that our animal ancestors are very alive in us. And for this reptilian brain, this is all about life or death. Just life or death. The individual consciousness, like the ants or the bees or school of fish, they have very low individual consciousness. It's more collective. They go together, they affect each other. They are like one organism together. But this is survival instinct in us, very alive in us. This one, the limbic brain, when we have them in us, then we have more emotions. And when it's triggered, it's fear, violence, anxiety, and anger. Those are the four strongest emotions that it triggers. Fear, violence, anger, and anxiety. Okay. So when we look at this brain inherent in us, we will understand why we are the way we are and why we behave the way we behave. When our emotional brain, the limbic brain, is triggered, we will react with these strong emotions. Because this brain is all about survival. This is the basic survival. This is a little more advanced to survival. This is just life or death. This is, am I safe? All day long, all of our life, our brain, our body, everything about our being is about, am I safe? Am I okay? That's that basic. And Oprah Winfrey, she said, she's been interviewing people 25, 30 years more. And through every single time, after each interview, whether that's a president or a famous person or a common person, always at the end that person will ask her, in different kinds of language, but it's all, was it okay? Am I okay? Was I okay? Never failed. That is the deep need in us. Am I safe? Am I okay? We have that need. And then we develop this brain, the cortical brain, that is more advanced for analysis, for reasoning. But it all comes to that, only make it more complex. So an animal, lower level, an animal like an ant or a squirrel, just wants to be safe. And once it's safe, it's fine. Yeah? But for us as human beings, the definition, the need for safety changes. Like I was watching a TED talk, and something came up, an advertisement, and this was what it said. It said, do you know that in the US there are 2 million undocumented immigrants? Do you know that the left wing tries to give them social security benefits, all of them? And do you know that resources in our country are running out only within 15 years? Act now. Vote yes or no on this proposition. Now, that triggers right there is the limbic brain, the emotional brain. You suddenly feel threatened. All these aliens, illegal immigrants, and they're going to take over this country, take away all the benefits, right? They are going, just like when the people from South America, and they try to seek refuge, amnesty in the US, and there was this propaganda. They will come and they will take over your homes, they will take your wife, they will take your children, they will take your jobs. This is all it's play on. It's play on our emotional brain, our sense of security, our sense of self, and it triggers. It triggers this fear, violence, anger, anxiety. It triggers fight, flight, or freeze response. It's so simple and clear like that. And we ask ourselves whether we are Democrats or we are Republicans or we are independent, how have we been affected by these kind of messages sent in our society? Yeah, you cannot be immune to it. It gets to you. It gets to you. And the friends that you are associated with, the people, the community, eventually will get to you. My brother and I came to this country when I was 17. My brother was 4 years younger than me. 16, 12. He was a little older than 12. We came here, we lived with foster parents. And we've always been so close with each other. And during the Trump administration, I discovered that my brother is totally pro-Trump. And one day we had this conversation, and he's like, yeah, what about all the immigrants? They will take away the jobs and everything. And I just looked at him aghast. My mouth just dropped open. I'm like, what do you mean? Because I didn't know he had this view. We never talked about it really, about politics. So he said, yeah, all these immigrants and this and that. And I said, Sonny, stop, honey. Aren't we immigrants? Aren't we refugees? What are you talking about? If we never had a chance, how can you be who you are today, and how can I be who I am today? These views, when it's triggered, when it's cultivated, they become explicit. It starts at the level of implicit bias. We're not aware of it. When we receive messages, news that trigger this emotional fear, we may or may not be aware of it. We develop this implicit bias without knowing it. It triggers the fight, flight, freeze response. So if we don't have the awareness of our body, of our thoughts, of our speech, it goes unnoticed. And yet we start to treat people differently. We start to look at people with suspicion. We become paranoid because of these implicit biases, and then they become more overt. They exhibit the inactions and speech that we're like, and then we feel righteous about those actions and the words that we use. We feel we will defend for those views, for those attitudes. It's the views. We learn about the stories about this monster. When people react to it, it comes to a kingdom and people try to reject this monster. And every single angry word that was said to this monster, like, go away, you are ugly, you are horrible, you are smelly. Every time a word, unkind word, said to the monster grew a little bigger and a little bigger and became enormous. So the monster that has become in our country are the violent oppositions between the parties, between members in the same family, members in the same community. We have been torn. And all of our oppositions, whether we are right or wrong, left or right, we feed that monster of fear, of violence, of anger, of anxiety, of righteousness. We feed them. And so finally, it becomes the master. It dictates our behavior. Like when I was reading the news or watching the video tubes, where on January the 6th, the day that was supposed to formalize the presidency of Biden, and a group of Trump supporters were urged, incited by him, and they attacked the Capitol Hill. That was I guess we have heard about his speeches, and still I'm sure most people were very surprised and hurt. And to look at the videos where the senators, the House members, were all in the same room. Apparently, they were trapped there the whole day together, and they were crawling. They were under the tables to protect themselves. In those moments, it didn't matter whether you were Republicans or Democrats, right? It didn't matter whether you were pro-Trump or against Trump. You just want to live. That's all it was. It was a very humbling moment, very humbling to see that, because the monster that we have fed has taken a life of itself. And those people who attacked the Capitol Hill, I'm sure in the beginning, maybe they said they did that for Trump. But really, once it's so triggered, it's so highly charged, it wasn't for Trump anymore. It had a life of its own. That anger, that violence, that passion, that just restlessness, everything, it just manifested itself. So if we see it in that way, then we will approach the situation of our society with more understanding, more softness, more compassion. We will not think, oh, we will punish those people. Like Trump, he urged them on, and yet by the end of the day, he came on and said, in the beginning, we love you, I'm with you, you are special people, and after everything, the aftermath, he said, those of you who attack the Capitol Hill, you do not represent the people, and you will have to pay for your actions. Yeah, that it's all about survival. In those moments, there's not anything that is noble or that is right or wrong anymore that we fight for. It's all about saving our skin. It's all about survival. And it's the monster that has become the master, that has taken a life of itself despite our own reason and logic. Okay? Let us breathe together. So there's this wonderful hand-brain model that I learned from Dr. Dan Siegel. So let us practice together, okay? Put our hand like this. Yeah? And this is the spinal cord. Our forearm stands for the spinal cord. This one at the wrist, the junction right here, that's like the skull, the base of our brain. And then right in the palm, this is the reptilian brain. Draw a snake on it. This is snake. And you know what I discovered? Like QAnon group, the pro-Trump group, their logo, their symbol is the snake, coil snake. That's scary. That's very telling, huh? So the snake is here, ready to strike. That snake. Maybe let it give a red color. Yeah, snake. Snake, fight, flight, or freeze response. The thumb is the limbic brain, the emotional brain. Can we do that together? Okay. The 4 fingers wrapped over, this is the cortical brain, like the bark of a tree, like this. So we have the brain model right in our hand. Okay? That's one side of the brain. If you do that, both sides, you get left side and right, left brain and right brain together. So let's look at this. When we are triggered by a word, a thought, or an action that is unpleasant to us, immediately the information from our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body goes through this spinal cord, through this brain stem, reptilian brain, go right into the limbic brain, and it immediately reacts. It flips, and then you just go into this stress response mode. You shout back, you're ready to fight, to strike back, or to run. But if we use our cortical brain, it's like when you're running, you suddenly see something and you're like, a snake, you just freeze or you run. But if you use the cortical brain, which evaluates the situation more carefully, it only takes awareness and also a split of a second. No, actually it's a rope. It's not a snake. Then you can dissolve this stress response, this fight, flight, freeze reaction. You see? Or a person just said something and we are ready to attack. But we say, no, that person is my brother. I do not want to attack my brother for his beliefs and his views, because I understand that he has lived in Arizona for 35 years since we came to this country. And the friends and the people he worked with has those views. And so now he has adopted those views. If I had moved out of that environment, if I hadn't come to California, I would just have exact same views like him. So that's the cortical brain, bringing understanding. And so I learned to breathe, I learned to remain quiet, I learned to not just fight in that moment, because it only severs our relationship. So we can practice when we have a strong emotion and we feel it in our, in our body, like the lungs, the lung brain. You feel you're like breathing fast, you're holding your breath, or your heart is beating so fast, or your whole body, or your hands clench. You realize this is the limbic brain. The snake is ready to strike or is striking. Then we close our hands. Close it. Say, breathe. It's okay. I'm safe. It's only a view. It's only my own brother. Yeah? We close. We cool down. And so we can avoid causing each other pain and damage. So this is the hand-brain model that we can practice when we feel stressed, when we feel anxious, when we feel fearful, when we feel violent, we want to revenge, we want to punish. We should breathe and stroke gently this limbic brain. Quiet the snake in us. Yeah. It's okay. I am safe. It's okay. I am okay. Huh? I also would like to introduce to you the left brain and the right brain, because it also helps us as practitioners. In a spiritual life, I discover, wow, all the wisdom is there. But if we understand a little bit more about neuroscience, we understand why we practice in certain way. So I will erase over here the denial, the snake that is ready to strike. We have the left brain and the right brain. So, standing like this the right brain, this the left brain. With all the grooves. A neuroanatomist, her name is Jill Bolte Taylor. She wrote a book, A Stroke of Insight. It's very amazing. I would recommend you reading it if you haven't read it. So she studied the brain for many years. And one day, she herself had a stroke. A blood vessel bursted in her left brain, and slowly she discovered that at first she couldn't move, then she couldn't speak because it affected her left brain, which is about language. And then she realized that at some moments coming in and out of consciousness, she couldn't feel the boundary anymore between her body and the environment. It's like becoming one, becoming enormous and spacious. It's like one side of her saying, hey, you have a stroke, you have to do something, have to call to get help. But the other side, wow, I'm so peaceful. I am so much in oneness with everything. I have no emotional baggage. Everything is just gone. All the mental formations, the strong feelings of love, of hate just vanished. It's just this spaciousness and peace, because her right brain in that moment became dominant. So we see that right in our brain. And the left and the right, they are both necessary for our survival, but they have different focus. It's like that. Whereas the left brain thinks about the past, the future, gets caught in details and more details and details on the details. It focuses on the product. What can I get done? Yeah, it judges. It analyzes, it judges. It discriminates, this left brain. It talks all the time, language, all the time. So it's like, it focuses on language, on logics, on linearity, what A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. Like that, the left brain. And in our society, we have become very much a left brain dominant. All day long. We are hooked up, we're hooked to information, to technology, to the internet, to our work, to details. And we become very much a left brain society. And that's why inevitably we water the seed of discrimination and preference, the schism in us and ourselves, body versus mind, me versus I versus others. So in the Diamond Sutra, the Buddha taught about the 4 wrong views. The self, that's right there, is the limbic brain. With the reptilian brain, we did not have really a sense of self yet, not concrete yet, just survival. But with the limbic brain, we started to have memory, autobiographical memory, things that happen and we accumulate to make that a self, this sense of self. I am, and am I safe, am I okay? It's right in this brain, the limbic brain. The Buddha's teachings 2,500 years ago addressed that notion about I am, the self, in the Diamond Sutra. First, the self. The second notion that the Buddha talked about. So we have the self versus others. Right there is the bias, the discrimination, the difference. And the second concept is human. We're humans. Versus, there's always that dichotomy, that split, humans versus non-humans, such as animals, plants, inanimate objects. And because there's the self, there's the I, there has to be the mind and the me. Possession, sense of, we become territorial. The more advanced we are, the needs for safety become greater. It's not just to be safe in your house. You want to be safe. You want to attack people before they attack you. You want to kill people before they kill you. You want to take other countries under your domination. That's safety has expanded itself in its definition, in its needs, you see? But it comes from that very basic needs. Becomes complicated with our development, the self, humans versus non-humans, and we feel righteous to exploit the environment, to exploit the animals, the forests, the waters. We feel righteous so that we can be safe, so that we can be worthy. And it was very amazing. Actually, I watched a talk on Mary Trump, is a niece of Donald Trump. And she tried to analyze what her uncle has been doing. And it was very interesting, she said. Whatever he's done it out of fear. He has this great fear for failure, for losing, because apparently his father taught him not ever to fail. So this looms largely over him. So he said, whatever he does is all out of fear, and he'll try to win regardless of the means, whether it's dirty or just or unjust, he'll just want to win. It right here, that's reptilian brain and the limbic brain. And Trump is not one person that we should direct our judgment towards to. I learned to realize that at first. I never was interested in politics or paid attention to it. And in some warped way, I've become interested in politics because of him. But Trump is a manifestation of our collective consciousness. We know that millions of Americans are pro-Trump. Millions and more people in the world are pro-Trump. Why has he become so successful? Why has he become a symbol? It's because he knows how to trigger our fear, insecurity. He knows how to trigger the violence, the anger, the anxiety in us. He knows how to trigger our fight response. And he is able to do it because it's in us. We allow those messages to water our own fear and anxiety because we have implicit biases. We have explicit biases. We have discrimination against the other. We have discriminations against the non-humans in our way of thinking, in our way of living in society, of consuming. We feel entitled. And that is why when they say, those people will take over your home, will take over your comfort, of course we're willing to fight. So the Buddha addressed all of these very notions about self, about human, living beings, and lifespan. Talking about human living beings versus, like, we can have this notion that we are just the mortal beings versus the Buddhas or God, the higher beings. We go back to the right brain. While the left brain focuses on details and discrimination and preferences, the right brain actually experiences this quietness. It doesn't use language. So when this neuroanatomist, when she had a stroke, she said she experienced this complete quietude, tranquility. She said that's nirvana, because there was no voice, there was no angst, no sadness, no anger, no dramas. For the last 30-something years of her life, it just became quiet. Nirvana is in us. If we seek the Buddha, it's right in us, in our body, in our capacity. We have it. In the Diamond Sutra, the Buddha also said, if you seek me in forms, if you seek me through sounds, then you are on the wrong path. You cannot find the Tathagata. You cannot touch suchness. And this right brain doesn't rely on signs, on colors, on gender preferences, on social status, educational levels, whatever. It feels spacious, enormous. Everything is in oneness. This right brain experiences the here and the now, the present moment. It's interested in everything that happens without putting it into certain categories or names or labels. It just experiences. The right brain enables us to simply be. And that's why we call ourselves human beings, to simply be. And yet, because as a society, we have allowed ourselves to be so left brain that we are not human beings anymore. We're human doings, human thinking, human judging, human destroying, not human beings. But we have this capacity inherent in our brain, in every cell of our body. We have a capacity to be, to touch suchness, to experience touchness, to experience that higher level of consciousness. So it took millions of years for us through evolution to become these Homo sapiens, the intelligent human beings. But it took us only one split of a second to go down to the mammalian brain, to go to the reptilian brain. One split of a second, we react. And we go down very fast. We're just a striking snake. But also means and only takes us from this reptilian brain or the limbic brain, one breath, one mindful step, one mindful breath, one thought of compassion. Close it. Hold the limbic brain. Hold the reptilian brain. Use this right brain that has the capacity for understanding and compassion, and first and foremost for self-awareness. We can go through evolution, not through millions of years, but only in one split of an instant. We can go from the reptilian brain, the limbic brain, to the cortical brain. And our practice is all about that, isn't it? We practice to quiet our mind. As I reflect on this, I'm so amazed. I'm so incredibly thankful for the Buddha's teachings, for all of our spiritual ancestors, and in particular for our Thầy, our teacher. I still have to pay attention to detail. Oh my gosh, it's 11:20. I'm very sorry. So I will wrap up. In our practices, if we look deeply, everything we do can cultivate that right brain being. Like when we practice noble silence, isn't it quieting the left brain language? And when we pay attention to our breath, to our step, the mind is quiet. We really experience our body. We're in our body. And at the same time, like this morning when we had the guided meditation, there's no breather. There's only the breathing. And we experience that. I mean, in my life, I've gone through many traumas and dramas, but the practice have really saved my life. And I recognize that in my daily life, for the most part, my mind is not busy thinking about the past, about what had happened to me in my life. Even what happened yesterday that was very unpleasant, it doesn't think very much about the past. It also doesn't think much about the future, what will happen to the community through this pandemic, what will happen to us when Thầy passes away in 20 years, in 10 years, in a month. It doesn't think very much about those things, but it very much has faith in the here and the now. And if we take good care of the here and the now, whatever happened in the future, we'll be able to care for it, to attend it appropriately. So every practice that we do, it's all about cultivating the right brain, that quietness, that spaciousness, that oneness, that present moment, that capacity to hold and to love. So I would like to end today's sharing with this story about a man. The article is from Lion's Roar. The title is From Hate to Love. And he was an ex-neo-Nazi founder, actually a founder. He founded a white supremacist gang. and he was frontman for a white power metal band. And he had hurt many people, people of color, people who were gay, lesbians, who were different from him. He attacked them, his gang. So such violence he perpetrated, and he said like this: when I did all of these things, then later I realized how much we needed that violent opposition to validate what we were doing. Doing all the things that happened on Wednesday actually validated their conviction. I practiced violence until it was natural and the violence became who I was. I needed it like a fuel. And I would beat other human beings to the point of hospitalization to get that hit of adrenaline. And he said, when they practice so much, when he was asked, how could you be that way? How could you act that way? His answer was practice. Isn't that interesting? We use the word practice. He used practice. It means you water. Whichever seeds you water in you, they will flower. If you water seeds of violence, of fear, of anger, of anxiety, of discrimination, they will manifest strongly in you. And he answered, practice. When you practice hate and violence, it makes your life so miserable that nothing but homicide followed by suicide seems to make sense. And all those things like love and compassion and forgiveness and kindness and all the most beautiful aspects of our human experience not only become unfamiliar, but repulsive to you. Isn't that amazing? And there was that man who put his leg on the desk of the Senator Pelosi, and he said he was willing to die a violent death. Yes, when we live with such violence, we are willing, we kill others, and then we end up killing ourselves. That's just the natural course. But what saved this man was that when he went to McDonald's one day, and he flipped his finger, which had the neo-Nazi sign, the swastika, to frighten the cashier. And she was an African-American woman. And she looked at him and she said, you know, I know you're better than that. I know you're better than that. And he said he stormed out of that McDonald's and he never came back. But he said that was his awakening. That changed his life. Slowly he saw the suffering in himself. So he said, people who romanticize the violent opposition to neo-Nazi or white supremacists or extremists, people who romanticize the violent opposition to neo-Nazis are playing right into the neo-Nazis' hand. They are only helping them grow, recruit, and galvanize members. So in our time, in response to what all the violence, all the attacks that are taking place in our society, I hope that each one of us as practitioners, we maintain calm, spacious, and loving, first and foremost to ourselves, remain safe to ourselves and not to wreak havoc in ourselves through anger and anxiety, because it hurts our body. And when we are able to calm the limbic brain, the reptilian brain in ourselves, and use our right brain, we'll be able to help others in our society. We still have to do what we need to do, but not from a point of revenge, not with the intention to punish, but with the intention to reconcile. Let us not use this new administration to attack each other like through the Trump administration, the Democrats and the Republicans. Let us remember, in the end, we all lie down and want safety, want to be alive. So we can cooperate. We can bring healing to our society. But each one of us has to do the work. Each one of us has to examine and re-examine that explicit and implicit bias right inside us, because that is the source of disease, of turbulence in our world. And we cannot point a finger outside, but we need to embrace it. We need to transform it from within and help each other to transform it. Thank you, dear brothers and sisters. Thank you, dear beloved friends. We know you are there and we are very happy. Bless you.